What's up, guys? This is Mike Coe from the BJJ Body Restoration Project. What's up, face man? Here to give you a little tip on hip flexibility. So, in the last video in the comments, someone requested by Ed, who practices over at the UFC gym, La Mirada, about how to get better flexibility of the hips and also help with hip impingement. So, let's first define what hip impingement is. Hip impingement is when you get pinching of the hip, usually in the front. I'm assuming that's what he meant. Another word for it is called FAI, or femoral acetabular impingement. So it's when the front of the hip gets pinched, like in the groin area. But why does that happen? So when you look at mechanics, what you have to look at is how well does the hip socket rotate within that joint space. And oftentimes, if you don't have the spinning occurring into there, what happens is your joint starts to roll. So if I were to take my femur, has a ball end of it, and then when it attaches into the pelvis, into a socket, so it's a ball and socket joint, what should happen is that joint space should be moving and that ball should be spinning in place. But then what happens is if you go to a point of end range and you don't have tissue elasticity within that joint and the muscles surrounding that joint, what will then happen is if you want to keep going, you can do it, but what will happen is your hip will then, that ball socket will then roll. You can sort of roll out of place just a tiny bit to a point where bones start traveling in ways that we're not supposed to, and they start hitting other tendons, ligaments, blood vessels potentially. In this case, it's probably going to be more tendons within the hip flexors, right? So, if we want to avoid hip pinching in the front, what you want to do is actually elongate muscles in the back of the hip. So, first I'm going to show you a stretch position. So some of you guys may or may not know, but I've been trained in something called Ginástica Natural, which is something developed by a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt by the name of Abraham Romano. And he has a system of movements that are a combination of like animal movements and certain types of yoga, and they're all intertwined within each other, so you can connect moves from one move to another move. Similar to yoga, similar to Jiu-Jitsu. But these movements are a little more tied, more specific towards ground movement. So one stretch that he shows is called the sit stretch, which pretty much looks exactly like the S mount. So if I have my right leg coming out here, roughly a 110-degree knee angle here, this leg is coming out to the side, bent, toes back up and bent back behind me, right? So if I want to do a quick stretch, what I could do is I could just lean forward into it, right? And I should be getting more of a stretch in the back of the hip here. So if I'm going to go forward into a stretch, I could stretch forward, but then you know what? We live in our bodies move in a three-dimensional world, so let's make it three-dimensional. If I were to go forward, then I can also go rotate to the right, to the left, and find a spot where I feel, hey, you know, there's a lot more tension, a lot of tightness there. Now, if you want to crank it up a notch, I like to use tools to try to get the best soft tissue mobility out of that area. So, I don't have a tennis ball, I don't have a lacrosse ball on me right now, but I do have a dog toy that looks like a tennis ball right here. So what you want to do is get more elasticity to the back of the hip, also the IT band. So if I'm going to use this ball, I'd rather use this ball on the glute because it's a large round structure around a round large joint. What I can do is I can put that tennis ball right under that hip, try to find a spot that is really tender, stay on it, and then I can then move through my motions through here. Again, try to find the most tender point will probably be your common spot. All right. Another thing I can do is I could use what some people have as a foam roll. So if I'm going to use that same position, I can put that foam roller here. I like to use a foam roll more for if I'm going to get more of the IT band because it's a larger, flatter muscle. So I can roll onto here, same position. I'm going to roll my whole body over that IT band all the way to the hip and then come on back. Good. Move forward all the way to the hip and then come on back. Good. Good. Now, I'm a big fan of re-educating muscles after you've got some flexibility about it. So what's going on is that I'm using the foam roll, using a tennis ball, a lacrosse ball. Hopefully I got better tissue elasticity. So I have better flexibility now, but you know what? When you gain flexibility, that doesn't mean that your body knows how to use it. You got to train that new motion. So if I gain 10 degrees, my brain and the muscles surrounding it don't know how to use that extra new 10 degrees, so we got to retrain it. So when I first showed this stretch of going forward, you know, I've had my hands on the ground to make it easier, right? But after you get your tissue elasticity, what I would suggest you by retraining is you want to activate the muscles in that new range of motion. So all you have to do is lean forward, don't use your hands. Lean forward through here, right? Making sure you're pushing your leg down into the ground to activate all those muscles in the back, right? Or back of the hip, your low back, core should turn on. Muscles around the thigh should all be active when you're here, right? So then you can do repetitions, right? Add an angle to it. Maybe you feel a lot weaker here, but you're a lot stronger here. And then if you want to make it a little more difficult, you add a longer lever arm or make your body longer. So in this case, I'm going to raise my arms overhead. If I bring my arms overhead, that puts a little more pressure, a little more demand on the muscle tissues in that new range. Yeah. So try that, guys, out when you have a chance. If you have any questions, leave in the comments. If you have any friends that also do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, invite them to like the page, the more the merrier. If you have any other requests, go ahead and add into the comments. Thanks a lot, guys.